Last year, Smith went on the podcast of the far-right online personality, Jake Shields. Jake Shields is a...
Once again, you are blaming us for your failures as a leftist. Your failure, Hassan Piker's failure. Someone like Jake Shields is literally not only someone who has a large following of people being converted to the far-right ideology, he himself is a textbook example of a normal person who got converted into this pipeline and this far-right vector of radicalization, who is also open-minded to us and is giving us a chance to push back on a lot of the things he believes and present an alternative vector of radicalization. Now, Jake Shields is not in a fascist organization. He's not there is no Nazi movement in the U.S. right now. He's not part of some kind of fascist phenomena that actually exists tangibly within politics. But you know what? You know what that means? That means, according to Brandon, we are less guilty than the Communist Party of Germany. Because what the Communist Party of Germany used to do is actually send communist representatives to Nazi party meetings to disseminate communist views among actual Nazis. And Eddie going on Jake Shields' podcast is less of a crime than that, because Jake Shields isn't even part of an actual fascist organization. He's just an MMA fighter who has really far-right views. So should we just sit by and allow the vector of radicalization to go in the far right without us intervening in any kind of way and then complaining about how bad and fascist everyone else is? Or should we make a concentrated effort to actually win people over to our position and provide an alternative vector of radicalization?
Holocaust and Nazi sympathizer, and he's pretty open about this, but Smith felt it was fine to go on his podcast for a friendly chat. When criticized for this, Smith...
No, it's not just a friendly chat, dude. Eddie is making a concentrated effort to provide an alternative, and you're not doing that. And if we don't provide an alternative, you're going to guarantee the success of the far right. This is the problem with people who do not study history, and they don't study the official positions of the Comintern, and they don't study the official positions of communist parties, specifically during the period of the 1930s and 1920s, when fascism was an ascendant phenomenon. The communist position was absolutely not to ignore the rise of fascist ideology and have a hands-off view. It was absolutely to initiate a dialogue, to dissuade people from fascist ideology, to present communism as a rightful alternative. The writings of Dimitrov, the writings of Ernest Talman, the writings of Chomsky, they all reflect this consistent theme. Clara Zetkin herself, remarking upon the rise of fascism in Italy, they all write about the importance of communists to actually counteract fascist propaganda by winning over the masses that are the target audience of the fascists. And I will actually find the quote from Clara Zetkin. Okay, so this is something called Failure of Proletarian Leadership. Communist parties are not without responsibility for the fact that even within the proletariat, there are disillusioned people who throw themselves into the arms of fascism. These parties have been insufficiently vigorous, their initiatives lacking in scope, and their penetration of the masses inadequate. This is what she says. The petty bourgeois and intermediate social forces at first vacillate between the powerful historical camps. When the proletariat has abandoned the goal of carrying revolution further, and it's withdrawing from the battlefield under the influence of reformist leaders, like Hassan Piker, who tells us to tail the Democrats, out of fear of revolution and respect for capitalists, at this point the broad fascist masses find their way to the spot where most of their leaders were, consciously or unconsciously, from the very start, on the side of the bourgeoisie. What is Clara Zetkin saying? If we don't go and make a concentrated effort to speak to masses of people who would indeed otherwise go to fascism, like Jake Shields, some who even have already, we have no one to blame but ourselves. There's a really dangerous sentiment that exists among self-proclaimed anti-fascists. And the dangerous sentiment goes as follows. If the masses are won over to the far, this means the masses are bad, and we need to declare war on the masses. This is an extremely dangerous line of reasoning, because the masses determine everything. And if you abandon the fight for this generation and for the masses, you are a fascist collaborator yourself. And that was actually the Comintern position in the 30s, which regarded Trotskyists who rejected patriotism, who rejected nations, who espoused all manner of antisocial positions. that embarrassed the communist movement. They regarded them as fascist collaborators who were throwing the masses into the arms of fascism. That's what Dimitrov said directly. And that is what Brandon is doing here in this video.
Complained about cancel culture and said that while he may not agree with all of Jake Shields' views, he still respects Shields on a personal level. So thus far, we've seen that extreme...
So what? How is the personal the same as the political? The same directly? That's ridiculous. You mean to tell me you don't have family members or coworkers or people in your personal life that have extremely contemptible political views? I'm sorry, but you're just not a normal person. You're living in a bubble or a cult where everyone around you is within the range of acceptable views. I'm sorry to tell you, but if you're a working class person in this country, you have coworkers flirting with the rehabilitation of Hitler. Absolutely. You have crazy conspiracy theorists talking about Jews and the Illuminati. And that is the norm if you're actually in the working class. Even if you just work at a Taco Bell, there's a guy at Taco Bell who is sipping lean, smoking pot, and is talking about how Hitler was fighting aliens or some shit. And to claim that you can cancel all of those people fundamentally excises you from the possibility of ever being able to relate to people normally.
Misogyny and fraternizing with Nazis are totally allowed within the ACP. I'll give another red flag. This one is...
No, there's no fraternizing with Nazis because Jake Shields is not actually a Nazi because he's not part of a Nazi organization or party. He's not an active Nazi. He is an MMA fighter who has views that can be called Nazi. He has opinions and he has an outlook contaminated by the disease of Nazism. Absolutely he does. But to say that he's a Nazi implies he's an active Nazi. It implies politically he's a Nazi. That's not the same thing. No one is fraternizing with Nazis. Eddie is trying to relate to him as another MMA fighter to dissuade him from his far-right views, to open a new and alternative vector of radicalization. You can't do that if you aren't personable. If you're not relatable on a personal level, why would anyone who got sucked into far-right ideology because of ignorance and lack of education ever deign to even open the possibility of listening to you? Preemptively declaring war on everyone who's been misled by far-right ideology to be your personal enemy is a recipe for guaranteeing and facilitating the success of far-right ideology. I promise you.